outskirts of Dubai, the Mohammed bin Rashid solar park is producing clean energy at record low prices.
It's actually a set of sodium-sulfur batteries linked together to make one massive battery with the intention of solving the primary challenge presented by renewable energy.
Some entrepreneurs and scientists say that if we wanted to, we could run whole countries on sunlight and wind.
Korea's energy ministry announced its new energy roadmap for the next 12 years, in line with the worldwide trend of turning to renewable energy.
Lower Austria's main natural resource. Hydroelectric power stations supply homes and businesses.
On the outskirts of Dubai, the Mohammed bin Rashid solar park is producing clean energy at record low prices. By 2030, this will be the largest single-site solar project anywhere in the world, with total investment set to reach almost $14 billion. The companies building it think this is the future of energy.
You can fix the cost doesn't change. Whereas in the case of fossil fuel-based energy, 75% of the cost is the fuel cost, which is oscillating as the market moves.
Although renewables are more of a direct threat to coal and gas, the need to invest in these sorts of projects here has been brought into sharp focus in recent years by lower oil prices. The fall in revenue since 2014 has shaken governments here and caused a regional economic slowdown.
To try and keep oil prices up, OPEC and Russia recently agreed to extend their output cut through 2018. It aims to cut 1.8 million barrels per day off markets, but analysts say that may not be enough to hold up prices.
Demand this year has been very strong, and particularly in the second half, and that's why, I think it's the main reason why prices have risen as they have done. But if prices rise much further, that inevitably will choke off demand in 2018.
The other major cloud looming over the deal is growing production out of the United States. Those who follow the market closely say the country shows little sign of slowing down, regardless of what happens elsewhere.
I made a point recently that the US will be the biggest crude oil producer in the next 5 years. I maintain that. They've increased production by 1.3 million barrels a day in the last year alone, when prices weren't as high as they are now. And the whole system is a lot more efficient. They can produce more at lower costs.
The IEA has also highlighted the threat from more US crude, warning that the world will see a surplus of oil in the first half of 2018 because of it.
China's a very key one to watch. Obviously, if there's any significant slowdown in the Chinese economy, or if there's a significant hit to Chinese oil demand from higher prices, those are significant concerns.
OPEC's next major meeting is scheduled for June, when it's expected to announce plans to wind down its supply cut. But with US producers unlikely to roll back their gains, oil markets will be hoping that demand holds up in the year ahead. Otherwise, we could see prices falling once again. Norwegia Barkil, TRT World, Dubai.
My colleague Maria Ramos spoke to the director of the Brookings Doha Centre, Tariq Youssef. He thinks that advances in renewable energy are a major threat to oil-producing economies.
I would say of all the shocks that could potentially undermine for a long time to come the fiscal sustainability of countries that rely on oil exports, especially in the Middle East, the advances on the renewables and the declining reliance on fossil fuels is probably the most concerning at this moment. And we're only talking 10 to 20 years away before many capitals around the world start imposing bans on the use of gasoline cars or the likes of.
Really, you see this as the most concerning, the shift from oil to electric?
As a structural change, a structural challenge, this is where the world appears to be moving. Now, yes, countries like India and China are still reliant on fossil fuels and will import enough. But given that this is a global trend, and we've seen oil prices hover at very modest levels right now, with most forecasts suggesting that things will stay where they are, I would be concerned right now from a fiscal sustainability perspective if I were an oil exporter in the Middle East and North Africa region.
PG&E is trying to store energy from the sun for times of peak consumption, just like today. Near Vacaville, the utility is trying to devise ways to hold on to power. KPIX5's Wilson Walker shows us how this works and why it's a crucial part of the renewable energy future.
So it's 90-something degrees right now at 9 in the morning, and there's a heater on in here.
Correct.
That's amazing.
Well, again, it has to stay liquid.
Just outside of Vacaville, PG&E is conducting an experiment with the future.
Like I said, this is not your normal substation equipment.
It's actually a set of sodium-sulfur batteries linked together to make one massive battery with the intention of solving the primary challenge presented by renewable energy.
That load's going up, your generation's coming down.
It's 11 o'clock, it's already 100 degrees, and the 9,700 solar panels behind me are doing their thing. They're taking the sun and turning it into about 2 megawatts of power, but our peak demand for that power doesn't come until later in the day, so wouldn't it be nice to take that energy and hold on to it just for a couple of hours?
And so that is then going to be feeding into the batteries that we see here, and we'll be able to harness that energy and send that back onto the grid when there's that peak demand in the evening.
Now it works.
It does work.
But it only works on a small scale, about 1 megawatt. So PG&E is tinkering with this idea, now trying a lithium-ion Tesla battery up in Yuba County.
We're testing these various technologies to be able to figure out what works best, how we can best integrate these into our distribution operations.
In fact, the technology is evolving so fast that this battery is already kind of outdated at just a few years old. Anything new would probably look very different.
Probably much smaller, depending on the needs of the customers in the area.
But the idea, storing power for release on demand, is the holy grail in the world of energy. So think of this battery as a glimpse of the future.
The idea is still the same.
Some entrepreneurs and scientists say that if we wanted to, we could run whole countries on sunlight and wind.
It actually doesn't take much. If you wanted to power the entire United States with solar panels, you only need about 100 miles by 100 miles.
Storing power from when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing so we can use that power later. We do this all the time with batteries at home, but AA's won't cut it on a national scale. Replacing fossil fuels will require ingenious ways to store power. Some methods have been around for a while. The US has stored power in reservoirs since the 1930s. We pump water uphill when power is abundant and release it downhill to spin turbines when power is scarce. In the same way, we can pump empty caves full of compressed air so it can be released to spin turbines later. We can even store power by beaming concentrated sunlight onto towers of molten salt, which can stay hot enough to turn water into useful steam for as long as a week. And Elon Musk is still pinning his hopes on batteries, which are easy to charge and transport. Putting these technologies to use nationally will be a huge undertaking, though. Right now, the US stores less than 3% of its total power needs at any one time. And we only meet 10% of our energy demand with renewables. To hit 100% would require an enormous investment, not only in solar panels and turbines, but in storage too. You can't put a reservoir just anywhere, and fields of batteries or salt power storage for solar plants are still more expensive than coal. Critics worry that proclaiming the renewable renaissance is right around the corner can actually make it harder to move toward that future. It discounts other energy tech, like nuclear power, and ignores all of the research and development we still have to do to give renewables a bigger slice of the market. The good news? We are moving toward that future. The US government is issuing more permits for hydropower reservoirs, for example, and public and private sectors are both building better batteries.
From its offices in San Rafael, a small power company called Marin Clean Energy, or MCE, is making large strides in promoting sustainable energy over fossil fuels. And its latest project is located in a most unexpected place, the Chevron oil refinery in Richmond.
There was 60 acres at the Chevron site, and we began having discussions with them about whether or not we could use that land to build solar.
In 2014, Chevron offered the land as part of its modernization plan, and after a year of construction, MCE last week quietly threw the switch on the 10.5 megawatt plant and began generating enough power to supply more than 3,400 homes.
It's a huge project. We think it's the largest publicly commissioned solar project, and if not in the Bay Area, maybe in California.
Richmond's mayor says alternative power companies like MCE are changing how energy is generated by steering consumers' dollars toward green energy providers, and without a huge sacrifice. The $23 million solar plant was made possible by customers who agreed to pay an extra $4 a month.
And this kind of thing shows, just how easy it is. And these things are going up all over the place.
MCE was the first organization in California to do this, but now there are tons, and it's happening all over California.
As customers take control of where their money is spent, projects like this are changing the landscape of power in California. It's not the future of energy, because it's already here.
It may be in a remote area of Mongolia, but ℏ𝔥𝔦𝔫𝔞's traditional house has all the modern comforts she needs, including a freezer.
Before we had no light, just candles. It's been 4 years since we bought the freezer, and it has really made life easier.
A quick tilt to the solar panel outside several times a day is all it takes to power her home. In the cities, power still comes from cheap and plentiful coal, but changes are underway. Mongolia has some of the world's largest untapped reserves of coal, which is its biggest export. But that isn't stopping the exploration of vast energy resources found above the ground. 220 kilometers north of the capital Ulaanbaatar, the country's first commercial solar plant is now supplying the central electricity grid. Funded by Japan, part of a bilateral emissions reduction program, it's seen as a big boost to Mongolia's renewable energy sector.
Even here, in the northern part of Mongolia, this 10-megawatt solar plant is working well. If it worked well here, there is no reason to deny the opportunity of harnessing solar power from here all the way to the southern border of Mongolia.
Mongolia is one of the least populated countries in the world, but mining and livestock herding are its biggest industries. The government is keen to cap the country's greenhouse gas emissions by promoting renewable energy.
Emission per capita or carbon intensity compared to the Asian region is quite high. That's why the government mostly focuses on reducing the GHG emissions, especially from the energy sector, under the Paris Agreement.
The target is to supply 20% of the country's energy needs with renewables by 2020. But beyond climate goals, renewables are also seen as good business. Mongolia's first commercial wind farm is now 5 years old. The company behind it is working on a second 50-megawatt farm in the Gobi Desert with Japan's SoftBank.
Now we need to start thinking bigger and start connecting the dots and building transmission lines and bigger wind farms and solar plants for us to be able to ultimately give power not to just China, but to Korea and then ultimately to Japan.
With renewables not yet supplying 10% of the country's energy, the export goal may appear a distant one. But as long as the sun shines and the wind blows, Mongolia seems ready to go the distance.
The Danube, Lower Austria's main natural resource. Along the river, hydroelectric power stations supply homes and businesses. 20 meters down, water propels 9 giant turbines in this power station, one of the region's biggest.
At this power plant in Greifenstein, we generate the annual consumption of about 400,000 households. We have a lot of ecological measurements that show that hydropower is really a clean and stable source of energy.
Hydraulic energy meets 60% of Lower Austria's electricity needs, wind 30%, thanks to €3 billion investment over 15 years.
It secures jobs and promotes exports. We are proud of it, and we have a reputation. Our technology is exported to other countries. We want to show that a country can cover all its energy needs with renewables.
A transition welcomed by inhabitants. Wieselburg, population 4,500. Many houses have photovoltaic panels. Walter made the move in 2012. The cost of 23 panels, €12,000. And in just another 2 years, pensioner Walter will have made a return on his investment.
This installation supplies electricity for 7 people. But we're only 5. There's a surplus, which we sell.
Next stop for Lower Austria, ensuring that renewables account for half of all forms of energy consumption by 2030.
Korea's energy ministry announced its new energy roadmap for the next 12 years, in line with the worldwide trend of turning to renewable energy. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced its 8th Basic Plan for long-term electricity supply and demand, which will run from this year until 2031. It stated in a press release that the ministry is shifting focus from prioritizing stable power supply and economic efficiency to focusing on environmental and safety issues. The nation will reduce its heavy reliance on nuclear and coal power plants and increase its proportion of plants that use renewable energy and liquefied natural gas. The goal by 2030 is to raise the ratio of renewable energy to 20% by increasing the use of solar and wind power plants. Currently, there are 24 active nuclear power plants producing 30% of the nation's electricity, but according to the nuclear phase-out plan, this number will be reduced to 18. According to the plan, greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced by 26% from the current average, and fine dust levels will also be cut by 62%.
A city surrounded by scenic beauty, nestled between the Green Mountains and the shores of Lake Champlain.
Being outside is such a part of this area. You know, you can see the mountains, you can see the lake. It's just like for me personally, like that's what I'm drawn to. So we want to take care of it.
Here in Burlington, Vermont, the natural environment fuels not only the economy, but also power stations. Wind, sun, wood, and water have made Burlington the first American city powered completely by renewable energy sources.
There is a way to move toward renewables and sustainable energy without breaking the bank. We've done it here in Burlington, and it can be done in other places.
The city converted from coal to locally grown timber as their primary power source in the 1970s. In the last decade, after committing to 100% renewables, electricity rates have not increased. But Burlington isn't stopping there. The city has set a goal of using only as much energy as it can produce locally, what's known as net zero. To achieve that, they're looking at more bike paths, more electric cars, and a more efficient municipal heating system.
I'm excited to be here with you.
Burlington's mayor is leading the state's effort to reduce carbon emissions and exceed environmental goals set by the Paris Climate Agreement, which President Trump called a bad deal for the United States.
Thank you, Governor, for being here.
The local plan is supported by the state's Republican governor and a coalition of business interests.
There is an opportunity to make real progress on climate change, even as the federal government makes this terrible mistake of withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement.
So when President Trump says that the climate agreement is costing us jobs, it's hurting our economic growth, how would you respond to that?
The impacts of a warming climate dwarf the impacts of getting climate policy right. And it is very unfortunate that we don't have a president that understands that today.
The mayor says Burlington has become a magnet for eco-friendly businesses, with green technology leading economic growth. The result is a city more committed to protecting the environment than to the president's policies.